Welcome back to Legends and Lore. For most of us in the modern world, death is viewed as an ending, a final curtain call, a fade to black. But for the ancient Egyptians, death was something entirely different. It wasn't an end, it was a terrifying, action-packed beginning. It was the start of the ultimate hero's journey, where the stakes were total existence versus absolute oblivion. To the ancient Egyptians, the land of the living, the Kemet, the black, fertile land along the Nile, was just a temporary station. The real destination was Amentet, the land of the West, the realm of the dead. But getting there wasn't guaranteed. You didn't just die and wake up in heaven. Between the tomb and eternal paradise lay a realm of unimaginable danger, the Duat. The Duat was a psychological and geographical nightmare. It was an underworld populated by knife-wielding demons, lakes of fire, giant serpents of chaos, and 12 heavily guarded gates. To navigate it, you needed a cheat sheet. You needed spells, passwords, and maps. You needed the collection of texts we now know as the Book of the Dead. Today, we are taking that journey. We are going to follow an Egyptian soul from the moment their heart stops beating, through the 12 agonizing hours of the night, to the final judgment before Osiris. Strap in. We are descending into the Duat. Before we enter the underworld, we have to understand what is making the journey. The Egyptians didn't believe in a single, unified soul like we might think of today. They believed a human being was made of complex, interconnected parts. If these parts couldn't link back up after death, you ceased to exist. First, there was the Ka. This was your vital spark, your life force. When you were alive, the Ka was sustained by food and drink. When you died, the Ka needed food offerings at your tomb to survive. Next was the Ba. This is often depicted as a human-headed bird. The Ba was your personality, your mobility. It was the part of you that could fly out of the tomb during the day to watch over your living relatives. But it had to return to the body at night. And this is why mummification was not just a macabre ritual. It was a survival necessity. The body was the anchor. It was the home base that the Ka and Ba needed to recognize and return to. If the physical body decayed and became unrecognizable, the soul parts would become lost, homeless spirits, eventually fading into nothingness. The preservation had to be perfect. The organs, liver, lungs, stomach, intestines were removed and placed in sacred canopic jars, guarded by the 4 sons of Horus. Once the body was wrapped and entombed, one final crucial ceremony took place right at the tomb entrance, the opening of the mouth. A priest used special ritual tools to symbolically touch the eyes, ears, and mouth of the mummy casing. This was a magical reactivation. It restored the senses to the deceased so they could see, hear, and speak in the afterlife. Because where they were going, they would need their wits about them. The tomb door was sealed. The sun set. The journey began. So what was the Duat? It is incredibly difficult to map because Egyptian mythology evolved over 3,000 years. But generally, it was envisioned as a massive, subterranean realm. Some texts describe it as the sky turned upside down during the night. It had its own river, a dark mirror of the Nile, which the deceased had to navigate. The landscape was terrifying. There were mountains of darkness, lakes of boiling blood, and fields where the crops were made of bronze blades. But the deceased wasn't entirely alone. Their journey mirrored the most important cosmic event in the Egyptian universe, the nightly journey of the sun god, Ra. Every evening, the Egyptians believed Ra died in the west. He changed form, from a falcon to a ram-headed deity, and boarded his solar bark, the Mesektet, to sail through the underworld from west to east, bringing temporary light to the souls trapped there before being reborn at dawn. The goal of the deceased pharaoh, and later common people, was to join Ra on this boat, to become part of his divine entourage. If you were on the boat, you were safe. If you fell off, you were prey. How did you get on the boat? Knowledge. This is where the Book of the Dead, or more accurately translated, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, became your lifeline. It wasn't a Bible with moral commandments. It was a practical survival guide filled with nearly 200 spells. There were spells for not dying a second time, spells for not walking upside down, spells to turn yourself into a crocodile to fight off attackers, and most importantly, spells that gave you the names of the guardians of the Duat. In Egyptian magic, to know the true name of a being was to have power over it. The Duat was divided into 12 regions, corresponding to the 12 hours of the night. Each hour presented new terrors and required specific passwords to pass its fortified gate. We don't have time to walk through every hour, but let's look at the structure of this gauntlet. The early hours were a staging ground, a place called the Netherworld Oasis, where the deceased got their bearings. But things quickly turned hostile. By the 4th and 5th hours, you entered the realm of Sokar, a deep, sandy desert part of the underworld, totally devoid of water. The solar boat had to transform into a serpent just to slither across the sands. At every gate, a fearsome guardian waited. They had names like He Who Lives on Snakes or Hippopotamus Face. The deceased had to approach the gate and loudly recite the correct spell. I know you. I know your name. Let me pass, for I am one of you. If you stuttered, if you forgot the name, there were executioners waiting with nets and knives to hack your soul to pieces. But all of these dangers paled in comparison to the event of the 7th hour, the midpoint of the night, the ultimate crisis. The solar boat reached the sandbank of Apophis. Apophis, or Apep, was the embodiment of pre-creation chaos. He was a massive, miles-long serpent whose only goal was to swallow the sun god Ra, stop time, and plunge the universe back into primordial soup. Every single night, this battle raged. The deceased had to use their magic to help the gods aboard the boat fight Apep. The god Seth, usually the villain in Egyptian myth, became the hero here, using his immense strength to spear the serpent, while the goddess Isis used her magic to confuse its senses. The deceased had to recite spells to paralyze the snake, shouting, "Get back, Apep, you enemy of Ra! Go back to the silence you came from." If the boat successfully passed Apep, the sun was saved for another day, and the soul moved into the final stages of the journey. Having survived the monsters and the geography of hell, the exhausted soul arrived at the ultimate destination, the moment of truth, the Hall of Ma'at, the Hall of Truth and Justice. This is the most famous scene in all of Egyptian mythology, the weighing of the heart. The deceased was led into the hall by Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. At the end of the hall sat Osiris, the green-skinned king of the dead, watching from his throne. In the center of the room stood a great golden scale. Anubis would take the heart of the deceased, which the Egyptians believed was the seat of intelligence and emotion, and place it on one side of the scale. On the other side, he placed the feather of Ma'at. The feather represented truth, balance, cosmic order, and justice. While the heart was being weighed, the deceased had to face 42 divine judges and recite the negative confession. They had to declare their innocence of 42 specific sins. They would say, "I have not slain people. I have not stolen the cakes of the gods. I have not told lies. I have not polluted the water." This was a terrifying interrogation. You were swearing under oath to gods who could see right through you. Standing by the scale was Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, ready to record the verdict. And sitting right next to the scale was the most terrifying creature in the entire Egyptian pantheon, Ammit, the Devourer. She was a chimera of Egypt's most dangerous man-eaters, part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. She sat there, drooling, waiting for the scale to tip. If your heart was heavy with sin, if it weighed more than the feather of truth, Thoth would declare you guilty. Anubis would toss your heart to Ammit. She would devour it in a single bite. This was the second death, total annihilation. Your Ka and Ba dissolved. You ceased to exist in this world or the next. It was the ultimate punishment. But if you had lived a good life, if your heart balanced perfectly with the feather of Ma'at, Thoth proclaimed you true of voice. You were justified. You had conquered death. Horus, the son of Osiris, would lead you to the throne of his father, and you would be welcomed into the blessed realm. You finally entered Aru, the field of reeds. This was the Egyptian paradise. But curiously, it wasn't an abstract, cloudy heaven where you just played harps forever. It was Egypt, perfected. It was a lush, fertile mirror image of the Nile Valley. The crops grew taller. The harvests were always abundant. There were no mosquitoes, no sickness, and no taxes. The deceased was expected to live a normal life there, farming, eating, drinking, and socializing with ancestors. But the Egyptians, ever pragmatic, even found a loophole for the work. Wealthy Egyptians were buried with ushabtis, small servant statues. If Osiris called on the deceased to plow the fields in paradise, a spell would bring the ushabti to life to do the heavy lifting for them. It was an eternity of perfect existence in a land they recognized and loved. The Egyptian vision of the afterlife is one of the most complex and fully realized theological systems humanity has ever produced. It reflects a culture that deeply loved life and desperately wanted it to continue, but one that was also acutely aware of the dangers of the natural world and the importance of moral order. They didn't fear death as a state of nothingness. They feared the journey through death. They feared being unprepared. For 3,000 years, millions of people lived their entire lives preparing for this final exam. They saved for their tombs, they memorized their spells, and they tried to live with a light heart, hoping that when they finally stood before the scales in the Hall of Ma'at, they would not be found wanting. Thank you for taking this journey into the Duat with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient history and mythology, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm. And subscribe so you don't miss our next descent into the past. Thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video.